and when the cycle begins, this prana begins to manifest itself. It is this prana that is manifested as motion, as the nervous motion in human beings or animals, and the same prana is manifesting as thought, and so on. The whole universe is a combination of prana and akasha. So is the human body. Out of akasha, you get the different materials that you feel and see, and out of prana, all the various forces. Now this throwing out and restraining the prana is what is called pranayama. Patanjali, the father of yoga philosophy, does not give very many particular directions about pranayama, but later on, other yogis found out various things about this pranayama and made of it a great science. With Patanjali, it is one of the many ways, but he does not lay much stress on it. He means that you simply throw the air out and draw it in and hold it for some time. That is all. And by that, the mind will become a little calmer. But later on, you will find that out of this is evolved a particular science called pranayama. We shall hear a little of what these later yogis have to say. Some of this I've told you before, but a little repetition will serve to fix it in your minds. First, you must remember that this prana is not the breath, but that which causes the motion of the breath, that which is the vitality of the breath. That is the prana. Again, the word prana is used for all the senses. They are all called pranas. The mind is called prana, and so we see that prana is a force. And yet, we cannot call it force because force is only the manifestation of it. It is that which manifests itself as force and everything else in the way of motion. The chitta, the mind stuff, is the engine which draws in the prana from the surroundings and manufactures out of prana the various vital forces, those that keep the body in preservation, and thought, will, and all other powers. By the above-mentioned process of breathing, we can control all the various motions in the body and the various nerve currents that are running through the body. First, we begin to recognize them, and then we slowly get control over them. Now, these later yogis consider that there are three main currents of this prana in the human body. One they call ira, another pingala, and the third sushumna. Pingala, according to them, is on the right side of the spinal column, and the ira on the left, and in the middle of the spinal column is the sushumna, an empty channel. Ira and pingala, according to them, are the currents working in every man, and through these currents we are performing all the functions of life. Sushumna is present in all as a possibility, but it works only in the yogi. You must remember that yoga changes the body. As you go on practicing, your body changes. It is not the same body that you had before the practice. That is very rational and can be explained because every new thought that we have must make, as it were, a new channel through the brain, and that explains the tremendous conservatism of human nature. Human nature likes to run through the ruts that are already there, because it's easy. If we think, just for example's sake, that the mind is like a needle and the brain substance a soft lump before it, then each thought that we have makes a street, as it were, in the brain, and this street would close up, but for the gray matter, which comes and makes a lining to keep it separate. If there were no gray matter, there would be no memory, because memory means going over these old streets, retracing a thought, as it were. Now perhaps you have marked that when one talks on subjects in which one takes a few ideas that are familiar to everyone and combines and recombines them, it is easy to follow because these channels are present in everyone's brain and it is only necessary to refer to them. But whenever a new subject comes, new channels have to be made so it is not understood readily, and that is why the brain, it is the brain and not the people themselves, refuses unconsciously to be acted upon by new ideas. It resists. The prana is trying to make new channels, and the brain will not allow it. This is the secret of conservatism. The fewer channels there have been in the brain, and the less the needle of the prana has made these passages, the more conservative will be the brain, the more it will struggle against new thoughts. The more thoughtful the man, the more complicated will be the streets in his brain, and the more easily he will take to new ideas and understand them. So, with every fresh idea, we make a new impression in the brain, cut new channels through the brain stuff, and that is why we find that in the practice of yoga, it being an entirely new set of thoughts and motives, there is so much physical resistance at first. That is why we find that the part of religion which deals with the world side of nature is so widely accepted, while the other part, the philosophy or the psychology, which deals with the inner nature of man, is so frequently neglected. We must remember the definition of this world of ours. It is only the infinite existence projected into the plane of consciousness. A little of the infinite is projected into consciousness, and that we call our world. So there is an infinite beyond, and religion has to deal with both, with the little lump we call our world, and with the infinite beyond. Any religion which deals with only one of these two will be defective. It must deal with both. The part of religion which deals with the part of the infinite which has come into the plane of consciousness got itself caught, as it were, in the plane of consciousness, in the cage of time, space, and causation, is quite familiar to us, because we are in that already, and ideas about this world have been with us almost from time immemorial. The part of religion which deals with the infinite beyond comes entirely new to us, and getting ideas about it produces new channels in the brain, disturbing the whole system, and that is why you find in the practice of yoga, ordinary people are at first turned out of their grooves. In order to lessen these disturbances as much as possible, all these methods are devised by Patanjali that we may practice any one of them best suited to us. Verse 35. Those forms of concentration that bring extraordinary sense perceptions cause perseverance of the mind. This naturally comes with dharana, or concentration. The yogis say, if the mind becomes concentrated on the tip of the nose, one begins to smell, after a few days, wonderful perfumes. If it becomes concentrated to the root of the tongue, one begins to hear sounds. If on the tip of the tongue, one begins to taste wonderful flavors. If on the middle of the tongue, one feels as if one were coming in contact with something. If one concentrates one's mind on the palate, one begins to see peculiar things. If a man whose mind is disturbed wants to take up some of these practices of yoga, yet doubts the truth of them, he will have his doubts set at rest when, after a little practice, these things come to him, and he will persevere. Verse 36. Or by the meditation on the effulgent light, which is beyond all sorrow. This is another sort of concentration. Think of the lotus of the heart, with petals downwards, and running through it the sushumna, or middle channel. Take in the breath, and while throwing the breath out, imagine that the lotus is turned with the petals upwards, and inside that lotus is an effulgent light. Meditate on that. Verse 37. Or by meditation on the heart that has given up all attachment to sense objects. Take some holy person, some great person whom you revere, some saint whom you know to be perfectly non-attached, and think of his heart. That heart has become non-attached, and meditate on that heart. It will calm the mind. If you cannot do that, there is the next way. Verse 38. or by meditating on the knowledge that comes in sleep. Sometimes a man dreams that he has seen angels coming to him and talking to him, that he is in an ecstatic condition, that he has heard music floating through the air. He is in a blissful condition in that dream, and when he wakes, it makes a deep impression on him. Think of that dream as real and meditate upon it. If you cannot do that, meditate on any holy thing that pleases you. Verse 39. Or by the meditation on anything that appeals to one as good. This does not mean any wicked subject, but anything good that you like, any place that you like best, any scenery that you like best, any idea that you like best, anything that will concentrate the mind. Verse 40. The yogi's mind, thus meditating, becomes unobstructed from the atomic to the infinite. The mind, by this practice, easily contemplates the most minute as well as the biggest thing. Thus, the mind waves become fainter. Verse 41. The yogi, whose vrittis have thus become controlled, sees in the receiver, the receiving, and the received, concentratedness and sameness, like a crystal before differently colored objects. What results from this constant meditation? We must first remember how in a previous aphorism, Patanjali went into the various states of meditation, how the first would be the gross, the second the fine, and from them the advance was to still finer objects. The result of these meditations is that we can meditate as easily on the fine as on the gross objects. Here, the yogi sees the three things, the receiver, the received, and the receiving instrument, corresponding to the soul, the external objects, and the mind. There are three objects of meditation given us. First, the gross things, as bodies or material objects. Second, fine things, as the mind, the chitta. And third, the Purusha qualified, not the Purusha itself, but the egoism. By practice, the yogi gets established in all these meditations. Whenever he meditates, he can keep out all other thoughts. He becomes identified with that on which he meditates. When he meditates, he is like a piece of crystal. Before flowers, the crystal becomes almost identified with the flowers. If the flower is red, the crystal looks red. If the flower is blue, the crystal looks blue. Verse 42. Sound, meaning, and resulting knowledge being mixed up is called samadhi with question. Sound here means vibration, meaning the nerve currents which conduct it. And knowledge means reaction. All the various meditations we have had so far, Patanjali calls sa-vitarka, meditation with question. Later on, he gives us higher and higher dhyanas. In these that are called with question, we keep the duality of subject and object, which results from the mixture of word, meaning, and knowledge. There is first the external vibration, the word. This, carried inward by the sense currents, is the meaning. After that, there comes a reactionary wave in the chitta, which is knowledge. But the mixture of these three makes up what we call knowledge. In all the meditations up to this, we get this mixture as objects of meditation. The next samadhi is higher. Verse 43. The samadhi, called without question, comes when the memory is purified or devoid of qualities, expressing only the meaning of the meditated object. It is by the practice of meditation of these three that we come to the state where these three do not mix. We can get rid of them. We will first try to understand what these three are. Here is the chitta, or mind stuff. You will always remember the simile of the mind stuff to a lake, and the vibration, the word, the sound, like a pulsation coming over it. You have that calm lake in you, and I pronounce a word, cow. As soon as it enters through your ears, there is a wave produced in your chitta along with it. So that wave represents the idea of the cow, the form or the meaning as we call it. The apparent cow that you know is really the wave in the mind stuff that comes as a reaction to the internal and external sound vibrations. With the sound, the wave dies away. It can never exist without a word. You may ask how it is when we only think of the cow and do not hear a sound. You make that sound yourself. You are saying cow faintly in your mind, and with that comes a wave. There cannot be any wave without this impulse of sound. And when it is not from outside, it is from inside. And when the sound dies, the wave dies. What remains? The result of the reaction, and that is knowledge. These three are so closely combined in our mind that we cannot separate them. When the sound comes, the senses vibrate, and the wave rises in reaction. They follow so closely upon one another that there is no discerning one from the other. When this meditation has been practiced for a long time, memory, the receptacle of all impressions, becomes purified, and we are able clearly to distinguish them from one another. This is called nirvitarka, concentration without question. Verse 44. By this process, the concentrations with discrimination and without discrimination, whose objects are finer, are also explained. In the two previous verses are explained the samadhi with discrimination and the samadhi without discrimination, in which objects are finer. Verse 45. The finer objects end with the pradhana. The gross objects are only the elements and everything manufactured out of them. The fine objects begin with the tanmatras, or fine particles. The category of fine objects includes the organs, the mind, egoism, and the mind stuff, which is the cause of manifestation. It also includes prakriti, or nature, and the unmanifest state called pradhana, in which the materials of sattva, rajas, and tamas are in equilibrium. The purusha alone is accepted from this definition. Verse 46. These concentrations are with seed. These do not destroy the seeds of past actions, and thus cannot give liberation. But what they bring to the yogi is stated in the following aphorism. Verse 47. The concentration without discrimination being purified, the chitta becomes firmly fixed. Verse 48. The knowledge in that is called filled with truth. The next aphorism will explain this. Verse 49. The knowledge that is gained from testimony and inference is about common objects. That from the samadhi just mentioned is of a much higher order, being able to penetrate where inference and testimony cannot go. The idea is that we have to get our knowledge of ordinary objects by direct perception and by inference therefrom, and from testimony of people who are competent. By people who are competent, the yogis always mean the rishis, or the seers of the thoughts recorded in the scriptures, the Vedas. According to them, the only proof of the scriptures is that they were the testimony of competent persons. Yet, they say the scriptures cannot take us to realization. We can read all the Vedas and yet will not realize anything. But when we practice their teachings, then we attain to that state which realizes what the scriptures say, which penetrates where neither reason nor perception nor inference can go, and where the testimony of others cannot avail. This is what is meant by the aphorism. Realization is real religion. All the rest is only preparation. Hearing lectures, or reading books, or reasoning is merely preparing the ground. It is not religion. Intellectual assent and intellectual dissent are not religion. The central idea of the yogis is that just as we come in direct contact with objects of the senses, so religion, even, can be directly perceived in a far more intense sense. The truths of religion, as God and soul, cannot be perceived by the external senses. I cannot see God with my eyes, nor can I touch him with my hands, and we also know that neither can we reason beyond the senses. Reason leaves us at a point quite indecisive. We may reason all our lives, as the world has been doing for thousands of years, and the result is that we find we are incompetent to prove or disprove the facts of religion. What we perceive directly we take as the basis, and upon that basis we reason. So it is obvious that reasoning has to run within these bounds of perception. It can never go beyond. The whole scope of realization, therefore, is beyond sense perception. The yogis say that man can go beyond his direct sense perception and beyond his reason also. Man has in him the faculty, the power of transcending his intellect even, a power which is in every being, every creature. By the practice of yoga, that power is aroused, and then man transcends the ordinary limits of reason and directly perceives things which are beyond all reason. Verse 50. The resulting impression from this samadhi obstructs all other impressions. We have seen in the foregoing aphorism that the only way of attaining to that superconsciousness is by concentration, and we have also seen that what hindered the mind from concentration are the past samskaras, or impressions. All of you have observed that when you are trying to concentrate your mind, your thoughts wander. When you are trying to think of God, that is the very time these samskaras appear. At other times they are not so active, but when you want them not, they are sure to be there, trying their best to crowd in your mind. Why should that be so? Why should they be much more potent at the time of concentration? It is because you are repressing them, and they react with all their force. At other times they do not react. How countless these old past impressions must be, all lodged somewhere in the chitta, ready, waiting like tigers to jump up. These have to be suppressed, that the one idea which we want may arise, to the exclusion of the others. Instead, they are all struggling to come up at the same time. These are the various powers of the samskaras in hindering concentration of the mind. So this samadhi, which has just been given, is the best to be practiced on account of its power of suppressing the samskaras. The samskara which will be raised by this sort of concentration will be so powerful that it will hinder the action of the others and hold them in check. Verse 51. By the restraint of even this impression, which obstructs all other impressions, all being restrained, comes the seedless samadhi. You remember that our goal is to perceive the soul itself. We cannot perceive the soul because it has got mingled up with nature, with the mind, with the body. The ignorant man thinks his body is the soul. The learned man thinks his mind is the soul. But both of them are mistaken. What makes the soul get mingled up with all this? Different waves in the chitta rise and cover the soul. We only see a little reflection of the soul through these waves. So, if the wave is one of anger, we see the soul as angry. I am angry, one says. If it is one of love, we see ourselves reflected in that wave and say we are loving. If that wave is one of weakness and the soul is reflected in it, we think we are weak. These various ideas come from these impressions, these samskaras covering the soul. The real nature of the soul is not perceived as long as there is one single wave in the lake of the chitta. This real nature will never be perceived until all the waves have subsided. So, first, Patanjali teaches us the meaning of these waves. Secondly, the best way to repress them. And thirdly, how to make one wave so strong as to suppress all other waves, fire eating fire, as it were. When only one remains, it will be easy to suppress that also, and when that is gone, this samadhi or concentration is called seedless. It leaves nothing, and the soul is manifested just as it is, in its own glory. Then alone we know that the soul is not a compound. It is the only eternal simple in the universe, and as such, it cannot be born, it cannot die. It is immortal, indestructible, the ever-living essence of intelligence.